vital nonprofit sector in society. Because business should tackle whatever things it can do that can make money doing it. If it can't make money doing it, then it's really not in that, shouldn't be in the business sector. And that's where the nonprofit sector comes in. It can take on social problems and social challenges that business can't find solutions for. Because remember, the nonprofit sector is voluntary. It's not coercive like government. The nonprofit sector is based on voluntary exchange as well between donors and Cato's a nonprofit. And I support Cato, hopefully supports Cato, but nobody forces us to. We do so because we support their goals and their aims. So I see the nonprofit sector as tackling a lot of the social problems that business can't successfully do. I see government's role, because it's fundamentally coercive and fundamentally bureaucratic, as basically defining the rules. I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. I do believe in the minimal state, which is about 10% of what our current state is, or even less than that. But with a reduced military role, but we need the government to protect us from external invaders. We need police. I don't think the whole private defense thing completely makes logical sense when you think it through. We need some final court system that the government does. And they need to set some, they're like the umpire, they set some rules and regulations that lead towards markets working more efficiently. So.
What about government subsidizing money losing windmill farms?
Oh, I think that's a grand idea. No, I mean, the government should not be, it shouldn't be subsidizing anything. Really, it's taking, remember, all the taxes it collects, it does that coercively. Ultimately, guns stand behind the tax stuff. They threaten the prisoner, they just take the bank, take the money away from them. So, based on coercion, so no, they shouldn't be subsidizing anything.
All right, I'm going to open it up to the audience. Do you have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, gentlemen. Thank you. Carla Howell with the Libertarian Party. My question is, the scenario you described between board members and management in corporations, why that colluding, if you will, why doesn't the market self-correct that? And are there any government interventions that you know of or that you speculate of that may be encouraging this to go on?
Well, first of all, the market is partly correcting it right now. You have shareholder activism going on that's trying to do things like a say on pay, and trying to have the shareholders sign off on the compensation packages for executives. And so there is partly, it is being corrected by the market. But the reason we have market failure here is primarily because the way it works now, possibly partly because of the way taxes work for capital gains, that people don't, these institutional investors, they don't hold stock for very long. They don't invest, they speculate. It's a casino. They invest and they buy hot stocks and they trade it when it cools off. And one of my favorite conversations when I go out and I talk to the investment community, the first thing all these guys tell me when they first meet them is, well, we want you to know we're a long-term holder. So that's really, I'm glad to hear that. We really like long-term holders. What's your turnover ratio in your firm? I mean, how often do you turn over yours? Like I routinely hear 100%. That means they don't hold, on average, their stocks for even 1 year. And they think of themselves as long-term holders. So if you're not going to hold a stock for a long term, you're just betting on short-term price movements of the stock. Why should you care anything about corporate governance? So we've also set it up so that mutual funds are not even allowed to have, say, a representative on the board. I would like to see the institutional investors have incentives to hold their stock longer and be encouraged instead of discouraged to actually get involved in government. I think when you divorce ownership and control, you've made a huge mistake. So we have to get the owners of American corporations, which are these institutional investors, to take corporate governance seriously and get involved on the board level. Otherwise, you just have this collusion that I'm talking about.
Yes, sir.
Barry Wood, an economics journalist. I'd like to ask you about immigration. noticed
Yeah,
that.
they said there were no media.
No, it's salted with media. Everyone who works in the New York Times, please raise your hand.
In my Whole Foods, which is just up the road from Pepper's, there's a lot of immigrants. I want to know what you think about enforcement of the laws. I'm thinking of Reagan and employer sanctions on illegal immigrants. Also, on free trade and subsidies. You mentioned you don't think government should have any subsidies. What about agriculture?
Especially not in agriculture.
If you talk to farmers here, they'll say we've got the lowest food prices in the world, mainly because of the structure that government and
They have nothing to
agriculture
fear.
have. And second, and finally, in this trade issue, you mentioned Marco Rubio.
You know,
He's
I
a big
can't take on more
supporter.
questions time. You're
Okay.
hitting me with a bunch of, I'm gonna take them one at a time.
I thought sugar.
Microphone back. What's the most important question you wanna have me answer before you give up the mic? Because you asked me a bunch of questions. Which one do you want me to answer before we pass the mic?
I guess I'm most interested in subsidies, particularly, say, free trade in food products.
The government has, in my opinion, I think one of the most harmful things that America does to the developing world is subsidizing our farmers and then making it difficult and then we export at subsidized prices, which harms the livelihood of a lot of these developing countries, and more importantly, makes it difficult for them to export into America. When this is what they have to trade, they're farmers. This is what they have to trade, and the fact that we're subsidizing that, we're exporting poverty while we make our own farmers richer. I don't think that leads not only to a good society, I think it leads to a less prosperous, less just world. So I think one of the most caring things we can do is stop subsidizing our farmers, let them compete on the world agricultural markets. And if they have lots of productivity, lots of high-tech equipment, they can compete. They don't need to be subsidized by the government. And most of those subsidies go to something like 90% of the subsidies go to basically corporate farms. It's a form of corporate welfare. We shouldn't do it.
Sir. Then Fred?
Former president, now director of IOC. Following on that question, I think most of us, certainly in this audience, are despair about foreign subsidies that have been going on for decades, and every 5 years they seem to get worse and worse because, as you point out, they've got corporate interests to back them, you've got lots of ideological interests to back them. The morality of capitalism, which your book sort of talks about, is it adequate to not get involved in those rent-seeking subsidies, or is there some case where the business community and its allies in the intellectual community need to form alliances to roll back government, to liberate some of the economic terrain that has been captured by collectively? We've gone up 130 years, we've been losing ground. We can't be on defense forever, can we?
Oh, that's a great idea. I support it. And it's the old rule that the benefits are concentrated in the few, and so that creates a strong incentive for the few to go and do the rent seeking, whereas the majority takes a lot of time and energy to try to resist that, and it's hard to gather that energy up to resist it. So that's the main strategy should therefore be lessen the power of government to do those things in the first place. And corporations get blamed for rent seeking, and yet the only reason they rent seek is because there's rent to be gained. If we didn't have that, then they wouldn't be seeking it. And as government becomes more and more powerful, and as our regulatory state grows, the incentives for business to try to game the system becomes practically irresistible. I'm very proud of Whole Foods not doing that. Fortunately, we're just grocers, so therefore we don't have obvious incentives to seek out from governments, at least none that I'm aware of.